The best thing you can do as a rep is not wait for the moment that you're going to be, let's say, a director or a VP to start learning about management principles. You have the time to do that. And then more importantly, I think there might be a moment where you're with the CEO of the company or VP or something, and you're going to have a conversation, and just in the quality of questions you're going to ask will highlight your level of thinking. And that's really what I did to sort of start elevating myself in my career. Again, like in your 20s, like these are formidable years. Like you need to take on an immense amount of responsibility to get exposure to things. Life is not, it's all supposed to be hard. It doesn't get any easier, but you get to decide like how you perceive that hard. Even something as simple as like The Sopranos. What made Tony Soprano fail at the end? Going into movies like that and content and thinking about it and saying what's the lesson here? God put this in front of me to get a lesson. What's the lesson I'm going to take from this? How am I going to apply it to my life? How am I going to take action on it? We start living like that. Nothing's out of reach for you.
On once again with one of the most respected individuals in the MedTech space, the number one podcast in MedTech, and somebody who has continued to not only make relationships, but continues to set a trend inside of the medical device and MedTech space, Mr. Omar Khateeb.
Man, good to be back on the show. New to medical device sales. You guys are doing a great job. It's been great to sort of watch your journey and be a part of it, see you grow the channel, grow, of course, the program, help so many people break into the industry. And it's funny. I used to do this before, like a few years back, because I really believed in what you're doing. But even nowadays, anytime people come in and they DM me and they ask about, med device sales and everything, I'm like, look, like my recommendation is just like, sure, like you'll learn a lot from the State of MedTech podcast, but like go listen to New to Medical Device Sales, go to newmedicaldevicesales.com, just consume all the free content. And then if you're smart, you'll realize that like it just makes a lot more sense for you to invest and go through the program yourself. So yeah, you're doing a fantastic job, and the industry's lucky to have you, man. I'm proud of you.
I appreciate that, and right back at you. And I just want you guys to know, if you haven't seen, we went to LSI because of you.
Yeah, that was great, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you finally made it out.
Yeah,
isn't it the best?
It's amazing, and we got to have that conversation of, you've been pushing me to do that for a while, and I finally went, and I can see why you went. The amount of human beings that you meet that are just amazing individuals, and everything they're accomplishing there is truly amazing.
And most importantly is that like, medical sales like is one, big and very important part of the industry. But when you go to the LSI summit, you have strategics there like Intuitive and Medtronic and Stryker, and not just like, random people. They have their VP of Biz Dev and Corp Dev there. Oftentimes their CEOs there, like Kevin Lobo from Stryker. I was going to be at LSI Europe, right? You have the most influential investors and VCs in MedTech. And of course, like 2 to 3 presenting startups, and that's not counting like all the other people who are involved. So like, agency owners like myself, there are, recruiters. So it's kind of like the who's who of MedTech, to be honest with you. That summit is like phenomenal, and every year Scott and Henry and their team somehow put on an even better event. So I can speak more highly of that event.
I was just going to say, as a first time goer, the energy there. Of like just the passion and everyone.
It's addictive.
Yeah.
Like that, there's a post LSI like low that you go into, because like the whole week you're at this like luxurious location, whether it's their USA event or Europe or Asia, all these people and everything. And then like coming back to work, like you're energized for sure, but it's kind of like coming back from like a really amazing like music festival. You're just kind of like, oh man, I miss it.
Yeah, and I share this because I want you guys to know is Omar's literally the who's there.
Funny. Oh man,
I literally watched everybody come to you, and when I mentioned your name, right, they're like, oh, Omar, right away. The conversations got started, and so I just hope people understand like what you're actually doing in this space.
I'll comment on that, and then maybe in a moment, I'll explain to the audience what the heck I do exactly. But I think, to be honest with you, like I'm very grateful to have that kind of like love and respect in the industry. And I think part of it is because I feel I always wanted to be like the industry's boy. Like that's our boy, that's our guy, And so I think because I go out of my way to really highlight and celebrate these amazing companies, physicians, innovators, et cetera, and tell stories that most people haven't, I mean, you run a podcast yourself, you're bankrolling it yourself. For me, for till this day, we bankroll that show. We do have sponsors and everything. I decided that my agency is going to be the main presenting sponsor this year, which is a smart move business wise. I'll explain that in a moment. But I think that's part of the reason why. I think that up until maybe like 5 or 8 years ago, MedTech was kind of this like sleepy industry. You didn't have people making content or anything, like aside from a few like industry journals. But then in the last, like, I'd say 6 years, like I'd say it started maybe 7 or 8 years, something like that. I want to say it started like in 2017 or so. First on LinkedIn, like people like myself, Joe Mullings, and a couple other people like making a lot of content and articles and everything. And then from there, like post 2020, you have like the LSI events, you have Mass Device, you have MedTech Innovator, Paul Grant's thing that doesn't, and I think that all these things existed, but it wasn't public. And then content creators like myself and others really brought that to the forefront to talk about the industry and everything. So I think like maybe that's probably the reason why. And I think I'm a pretty likable guy,
After helping thousands of people break into medical device sales, we've received a lot of messages of asking for more personalized coaching and mentorship. Our average member breaks in at around 9.5 weeks at over $113,000. And if you're really interested and really motivated to break into medical device sales, you can click the link below or check out our website at newtomedicaldevicesales.com. See all the testimonial videos of people breaking in with Medtronic at over $170,000, at Abbott $175,000 as a full-line rep. So if you're really excited and also motivated and wanting personalized coaching and mentorship, then go and click the link below, schedule a call, and we'll get you where you want to go. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
I do. I mean, I always try to be, there's this old saying that Zig Ziglar has, which is when you go out to find a friend, they're hard to find. But when you go out to be somebody's friend, they're everywhere. And so I always try to do that. I try to be everybody's friend. I try to really understand in what ways can I help that person. And more importantly, that like every time somebody interacts with me, like it's an experience, right? And so that could be an investor I'm meeting for the first time, or I kind of shy from, but we actually have fans of State of MedTech. Like when I go out and stuff to certain conferences, there are people who come up who are like, some of whom are investors, that's a really crazy experience. Like, oh man, like I listen to your show every single week. And so, in those moments, I really want to make sure that I'm bringing the best version of myself to that conversation. I'm listening to that person, and I have like that energy, because that's what they're going to remember. The people, they rarely remember the things that you tell them or say, but they always remember the way you make them feel. And I think that through the show, people always walk away a little bit smarter, a little bit more educated, and definitely entertained. Like we do a good job of entertaining on that show. Yeah, and I love that. And so besides podcast host of the #1 MedTech show, what else do you do? Yeah. So, maybe there's a good intro to my journey, and I'll give the audience like a quick intro into that, which is, I started off in this industry, like I think it's now been almost 14 or 15 years ago. So I left medical school, went and carried the bag. I was in sales. I worked at a surgical robotics company called Mazor. It was the first robotic spine company. Did that for a couple of years, got elevated internally in the organization to be the U.S. marketing manager. That's where I really started cutting my teeth on marketing. And so in 2014, 2015 is when I started to read more about it, this concepts of growth marketing, etc. Mazor got acquired. I felt that if I wanted to really compete, I had to move out to the most competitive environment, which is Silicon Valley at the time. It still is in some ways. And I moved out there to really understand like what is growth marketing, how do AI companies and B2B SaaS companies and tech companies do this. And then I wanted to be that person that brought into our industry. So from like 2015 to 2021, I really focused on these ideas around growth, around leveraging content, thought leadership, category design, like all these things that are a little bit more common now in our industry, but back then people did not believe in it. And then in 2022 is when I started my business. That's when you and I met. I'll never forget that day. It was fantastic. And then, in 2022, I was a solopreneur. I sold digital products. I had like a course online for like founders and medical salespeople. And then like most, I think, business owners, you have to realize that in order to survive, you have to either do more volume or you have to solve more expensive problems. And so, I could not have done, probably could have done more volume on our industry, but I didn't want to go down that route. And so, lo and behold, like little by little, I ended up starting an agency. And I resisted the idea because most of the time I just don't like marketing agencies. I felt like a lot of marketing agencies were very cookie cutter, charge a lot of money. They deliver some great results, but like it wasn't like moving the needle. Like, no, it's very rare that like I heard a MedTech company saying like, oh, like our success is because it's one agency, right? And so right around 2025, I decided like, okay, it's time to become a real agency. So I changed, I had like a LLC name. So we went with the name MarketCraft. And at the time, for the last 10 years, I was mentored by this gentleman named Bruce Cleveland, who's a venture capitalist out in Silicon Valley. He doesn't live there anymore though. And he was the chief marketing officer for C3 AI, is a multi-billion-dollar AI company. He was early engineer at like Oracle and Apple. Like he worked like almost directly, I think, for Larry Ellison and stuff. And so he wrote a lot about the reasons why companies failed as startups, right? And he wrote it in this book called The Traction Gap, talking about like a roadmap for inflection points of how you raise capital. And then over the years, like, he would always talk to me about this concept around market engineering. And so then when I was thinking about agency, I'm like, you know what? I want to be a market engineering agency. And the difference is that part of market engineering is marketing, but it's not just marketing. And the idea is that, marketing is more of a lot of it is, there's some science, but more of an art, right? In terms of like campaigns and everything and dealing with human behavior and everything. But engineering is like, it's very precise and calculated. And so these things that seem mutually exclusive actually go hand in hand together. So the idea is, when we as MarketCraft, and the name, of course, I have to give a shout out to Bruce. He helped me with that name because I had something in mind, and he came back. He's like, "What about MarketCraft?" I'm like, "That's it." Idea is, what does it mean to craft a market? So we work with early stage companies who have disruptive products to essentially decide how are we going to either develop and design a completely new category or redesign an existing category. Then how do you engineer a market around that so that you are able to raise capital, get the attention of strategic acquirers, and also drive early clinical adoption? If you do those things the right way, again, through positioning and messaging and thought leadership and content and all these things, right, it gives you leverage as a company. And, to kind of bring it back to like the state of MedTech and everything, when I talk to all these strategics and investors and everything, most investors today are not venture capital investors with a capital V. And what I mean by that is that most of them are playing private equity. They want very de-risked companies, and they want to see traction, right? And so it's not enough just to get through FDA and de-risk your company, right? And some companies can do that and get acquired, but those are becoming few and far between. And so now the idea is that as a founder, you have to start thinking about ways to develop a market in a category and get early traction before you technically commercialize, right? If you do those things the right way, it sets yourself up as a company in the best ways to not only raise money, but potentially get acquired, right? And so that's kind of the game that we're playing. And, more importantly, I think like, my vision for MarketCraft obviously is to start, so we have our own technology adoption group. We're on the far left with like early adopters in our own business, in the sense that we're starting off with like early stage companies, but in our roadmap, we will work with very large strategics like an Intuitive, like a J&J, who I've spoken with, but I just don't have anything to sell them right now. And that's my, and I'll get to the reasons behind that in a second. Because when those companies launch a new product, like that's technically a category defining moment. And then they're trying to engineer an entire market around that, right? To either develop new market share or take market share from somebody, right? So those are the kind of things that we're doing these days. There's a mix that goes into that in terms of like, when it comes to your market engineering, there's a go-to-market motion there that combines both sales and marketing. But those are the kind of things that we focus on. And I'd say like the best way that people can think about MarketCraft today is that aside from the strategy and marketing, if you strip all that out, what these companies are really getting is an outsourced marketing and strategy team, which is really expensive to hire in-house. Um, and so we're able to execute these strategies, you know, at a very high level for these companies, because even for a company that's well capitalized, for them to go and hire one or two people who have been trained the way that we've trained our people, first of all, it's going to be very difficult. And even if you can, like that's, you know, it's a very costly couple of headcount, you know? And so that's kind of like what I do for a business.
And I love it. And what I want people to understand is, because especially if you guys are brand new to medical device sales, or you're someone who's 5, 10 years, what I really appreciate about Omar and what I want you guys to see is someone who did it, has had success, and then again had been a part of, hey, got acquired and now wanting to go the entrepreneur route. What you guys don't understand is medical device sales is basically the launching pad if you want to do all business, right?
Yeah.
You're learning sales, you're learning all these aspects. But again, whether you decide to climb the corporate ladder or you go to the startup world, there's so much to do. And then that's what I really enjoy about this, and what I wanted to talk a little bit more about is most people don't know the startup world, right? And like you just said, what people don't understand is what Omar's talking about is, like, in the startup world, a lot of times people will go raise money. We can be, and it's going to have different series and all the stuff, but then they can raise, let's just say $10 million. Well, that $10 million is, when I was part of a company, they go raise around $10 million to say, we're coming to the USA. We want to play in the big market. We want to play with the big boys. We need this much capital to come in and do that. That's how, again, if you're a rep who wants to maybe go to a different company, you can go there and they have different packages they can give you, and then you might get some equity, right? It might not be as established as the big boys. But what I really love what you just said is, again, I want you guys to start opening your mind as you come into med device sales, is it's not just, I have to be a rep and that's it for the rest of my life, is, hey, there's so much other things that you can do. And to your point, what you guys don't understand is also, he's at early stage, but what he also mentioned is these big companies, it actually financially will be more affordable a lot of times to go get someone like an agency like Omar, compared to hire one or two, let's just say one or two employees that, let's just say they're 120 grand. You get two of them, that's 10K a month. That's 20K in salaries plus 401ks,
it's gonna be
all the stuff.
cost a lot
Yeah,
more
it costs way more. And so that's the business side that I want you guys to see. And then can you fill that gap? And that's what Omar and them are doing.
Yeah, and the other thing I was gonna say is, I think for people starting off in medical sales as a rep, it's like a great place to start. And I'll say this is, I always like to boil things down, one, not just to first principles, but also to like really extreme examples. And so like the extreme example is that you can look at like somebody like Elon Musk. So Elon Musk kind of, I think, invented like a completely new form of management. So if you look at the CEOs of, like, name your, whatever car manufacturer you want, when something goes wrong or something's happening, the CEO like has like a VP, and that person has middle management, everything, and they go and figure out what's going on. There's a report, there's a meeting, etc. Elon gets on a plane, just goes directly to the factory floor, right? He's like in the thick of it. And so as a rep, I think that the most important thing, and this is why it was a great experience for me, and even when I was a head of marketing, I spent time out in the field in hospitals, is that you have to be in the environment that your products are being sold. You gotta like see what your customers seeing, the smells, the sights, all of that. Because it'll give you a really good idea. But the other side of it is that what I did when I was a rep is that I spent a lot of time studying. And so the best thing you can do as a rep is not wait for the moment that you're going to be, let's say, a director or a VP, to start learning about management principles, or, like concepts like market engineering, which, by the way, there is Bruce has a book out now called Market Engineering. You can go buy it. We're quoted in it, which is really cool. To start thinking about this from now, because you have the time to do that. And then more importantly, I think, is there might be a moment where you're with the CEO of the company or VP or something, and you're gonna have a conversation, and just in the quality of questions you're gonna ask will highlight your level of thinking. And that's really what I did to sort of start elevating myself in my career. My late mentor, Chris Sells, funny enough, his last name is Sells. He was a legendary sales leader. When I was a rep, I was interested in becoming like him. I wanted to be a VP sales. And he came to me and told me, he's like, Omar, there's like thousands of salespeople out there. And he's like, take this as an opportunity to go in-house, go into marketing, and see how the company actually works, right? And the benefit about marketing in our industry, it's like a good and bad thing, I think, is that it encompasses so many different things. So marketing in MedTech, med device, touches every single part of the organization. It touches regulatory, it touches quality, it touches finance, right? A lot of times, if you're in a startup environment or mid cap, marketing owns the sales budget. So when I was at Mazor, I had a multi-million-dollar budget as like a marketing manager. I thought it was normal. And part of that budget was like the sales budget for when they do labs and everything. And so at the time, I was doing a lot of really like not so glamorous work, but I think that when you do the not so glamorous work, that's where the magic is. So like the things I was doing, I wanted to be focused on strategy. But what was I doing on my day to day? I was dealing with like campaigns or like the logistics. So like I did a lot of logistical work, meaning like I had to work with a trucking company and figure out like, okay, if we're doing a lab on this date, how can I ship the robot there in the most cost efficient way, right? And then, maybe I try and do another lab on the way there to reduce costs, right? So when you start learning about those levers, right, of business, which is managing a P&L, all these different things. And again, even though I was in a small company, I didn't have my own P&L. I made myself my own P&L or profit and loss statement to understand like, oh, this is my budget. Here's how I cut costs and everything. I even tracked. And now like with AI tools, it makes it so much easier. But back then I had a spreadsheet to track every decision I made. How did that impact the business and how much money did I save? And of course, all this was like selfishly motivated because I wanted to use this as like proof as to like why I should move up in leadership, So I think that the more responsibility you take on, the better. And I don't remember who said this to me, but I remember hearing this a long time ago, which is the person who owns the process owns it all. Because most people, they're lining up to take credit for things. Not everybody's taking responsibility. The person who takes responsibility owns the process, and you have leverage at that point, right? And so those are the kind of things that I always tell reps to think about. And again, it's not easy. Like this is, I would argue, the hardest. If somebody can find another sales job that's harder, maybe there's something in oil and gas, I don't know. But being a medical salesperson is hard. You're not like, I think less than 50% of your time you're actually selling. The other part of the time you're dealing with inventory management, travel, all these different things. So it's a tough job. So it is hard to kind of squeeze out the energy to do these other extra activities. But like if you're in your 20s and you're single, like you have no excuse. And I'm not telling people not to have a social life. When I do believe that when you're young, you do have to sort of listen to your genes, and your genetics are telling you to go out and socialize when you're young, right? It's more like an evolutionary thing. So like, but that doesn't mean that you have to go out on like all night bingers on the weekends. Go out, have a social life and everything, but like, look at your like Saturday and Sunday and carve out the time because compound interest really is the eighth wonder of the world. And so if you just carve out like 1 hour a weekend, adds up to 52 hours a year, right? That's, little over 2 days. Like imagine you had 2 days of just hyper focused work. Like what kind of things could you accomplish in that time? And the one thing you don't want to do is look back and say, man, I had all that time that I'll never get back. And like, what did I do? I woke up at noon on Sundays, like hungover, and then rolled into brunch to get more drunk and hungover, So those are the things I would tell people. And again, like there's ways to manage this. There's benefits to going out and socializing and meeting people and everything. That's very important. But like, the habits of success, it's like very much like chains. Like right now, your habits, they're like if you're in your 20s at least, I would say in your 20s, they're like too light to be felt. But one day those chains get heavier and you wake up and they're too strong. You can't break them. There's people I know in their 30s and their 40s, those habits of the mind, they are like heavy chains. Yeah. They cannot be broken at this point.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a podcast and it was Alex Hormozy, and he talked about one of his young guys was like not getting into the gym. And he kept making an excuse, and Hormozy just said, just stop. He's like, you're the youngest with the least amount of stress and the least amount of resistance right now. So if you can't do it now, just
I agree.
Stop acting like you're going to, because it's not going to get easier for you in the future.
I know. I mean, look, like no offense to anybody out there, but like I'll direct this specifically to young men. But like if you're a guy and you're in your 20s and you're single, you should be in like phenomenal shape. You should be like consuming and reading books like nobody's business, all these different things, because like you have no excuse. Like I'm not impressed anymore when I go out and I meet like influencers from Instagram or something, and they're like single. I'm like, yeah, you should be like this. The people that I'm really impressed by are people who are like myself, who are other dads who have like their own business. They got a wife, they got kids, they got responsibility, and then find a way to be in like phenomenal shape. They're reading, they're very well educated. They're staying on top of trends, like all these things. That's hard.
The discipline is high on that one.
It's high discipline, and also like you have to be like a no machine. You have to learn how to say no to things. And so like I'll tell you, like specifically back in my career, when I said no to something that seemed counterintuitive at the time, but one of the, and I won't mention who it is. He's a mentor to this day, but one of my mentors back then, which by the way, like you should pick your mentors very carefully. I make a mentor of everything, like people, books, etc. I don't have like a single mentor. But his advice to me was like, hey, you should get really good at learning how to like manage an Excel spreadsheet and everything. And at the time, he didn't like, I was reporting to him. And at the time, like it seemed like a good idea, but I was like, I'm going to spend all this time and effort to go from a mediocre person on Excel to like above average. And that just seemed like a complete waste of my time and energy. And I was like, what am I like top 1% at that I want to become like top 0.001%? I put all my effort into that, right? I think those are the kind of trade-offs you have to make. And so like for me, I realized very quickly, like, hey, it's not that I'm not a Excel spreadsheet kind of guy, but it's just like I don't have any interest. Like that's the problem. Like you have to find things that you can easily get obsessed about. And on the flip side of that same coin, the worst piece of advice I ever heard given to young people is like, do what you're passionate about. It's a terrible piece of advice. You should not do what you're passionate about. What you should do is figure out like, what am I really good at that people pay me money for, and how do I become the best at that? Because like, I'll tell you what, like something that you get really passionate about, winning. You get real passionate about winning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's to your point, that's the thing is I hear it all the time at 22, 23. Just actually had this situation happen where they're like, I know I have to do this. And then 2 months later, no, I don't want to do it now. And at a young age, you just don't know, right? Like that, going back to the passion. And some do, some can have a feeling, but most of the time you're trying to figure out life as you're going through that process.
Yeah, well, the only way that you can do that is just by taking on an immense amount of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, like in your 20s, like these are formidable years. Like you need to take on an immense amount of responsibility to get exposure to things. And again, you're too many people, specifically reps who I see who are in large companies, they feel like it's the responsibility of their company to develop them. And it's not. It's not their company's responsibility or their management's responsibility. It's their responsibility. And so like, a lot of reps, like, when I was selling my digital courses, I was shocked. They would complain all the time about upward mobility and this and that. I'm like, okay, well, when was the last time you like attended a conference on your own dime, or did you take a course and everything? And so many of them were like, I don't. And I'm like, so you have all this like extra income because you're a single person. Even those who are married, I'm like, you don't say like, hey, let me carve out a couple grand, $3 or $4 grand, and people can afford to do it because I see people going on these like really wild trips to Mykonos, going on cruises, all kinds of nonsense. But I mean, and again, like, look, great example is like LSI. Like that's like you really want to like go up in your career, like go to that conference. It's not a cheap conference.
No, it's an investment.
The ticket alone, I think, is like up to $3 or $4 grand right now, right? Not to mention that it's in a very luxurious location. So with your travel and everything, like going to LSI is going to cost you maybe like $5, $6, $7 grand, but it's worth it because of the kind of people you're going to meet, the rooms you're going to be in. Okay, let's say you can't go to LSI. Man, my show, we publish some of the top keynotes from that show. You can go to LSI's YouTube page and watch those panels. So there's like no excuse in this day and age.
Well, and the thing I just want people to understand, because I've had this conversation before, is it's about investing. And what you're just saying is what most people do is they make more income, especially the people who want to get into the industry. They want to make more money. They go and they up their lifestyle. They get the new Mercedes and they put it on a lease, or they go buy more than the nice necklaces or the watches, and they go live in a new place, which is fine. Do your stuff. But what they don't do is they don't invest in them. And this is the biggest thing, is you have to continue to invest in yourself. And so
100%.
LSI, I just want to like touch on this is like, again, most people will be like, oh, $5,000. They don't see it because they're not having the right mindset. They'll say, oh, I can do that for Greece because that's going to be something I think about forever and I can post on my Instagram and look back and be happy. But what most people aren't doing in their 20s and early 30s and forever, but really that is, am I investing in myself? And again, what I want people to really understand when you think about investing, even when I started working with you, right? It was not, does this return today or this week or this month, right? Which it did. But just so we're clear is, how about in 6 months or 12 months or in 5 years? Do I feel that the compound that I put in here will be exponentially more than that?
Absolutely. And look, like I'll bring this back to like market craft and our team there. So as an example, so when you think about market engineering, it can boil down to like 5 very specific tenets, like category design or redesign. Okay, so like your company, are we creating a new category, a new way to think about things, or are we going to an existing one and like changing the way people do things, right? There's that. There's messaging, which is, you know, the language that's being used. Your positioning, right? After your positioning, you get into thought leadership, right? And then your go-to-market essentially executes against those things, right? And so in market craft, we spend a lot of time to think about like, what does that actually mean? And then how do we become like best in class in doing that, right? And so for our team, you know, like we're changing the vernacular right now. So like we don't have marketing managers or marketing associates. We have a digital engineer. Digital engineers are specifically those who engineer content, persuasive copy, design, execution, those kind of things. And we have a market engineer. A market engineer, we have them go through a certification, right? And so even though like if you took the wrapper off, like we are technically a marketing agency in some ways, the other side of it is this new thing of market engineering. So it's very important for us to go deep on that and understand it in a much better way than anybody else. Something as simple as like, okay, like first principles thinking, like what is the purpose of a marketing agency? What's the purpose? It's to get attention, right? Why do you want attention, right? It's like, well, there's like very like philosophical and psychological reasons why attention exists. Why you need to control it, right? What happens when you do it over a repeated amount of time? How do you get attention, right? You know, so that's a very, very important thing. That's why, you know, when you go back to like creating a category, if you have a market that's this big, right, you have one of two choices to win. Either within that market, you're going to redesign something. So if we have a market that, let's say it's this table right here, it's that circle. If we're redesigning, we're putting this glass in, that's different enough that's going to attract people within that market into this new specific subset. And then this glass can grow. Or it's going to be outside of that market and it's going to be over here. And now we're going to attract people from this market over to this market, right? So understanding things like that, you know, sets you up in a much different level of the game, you know? And I think that's the other thing is that people, things that they take for granted, they don't ask deeper questions and think about it from a first principle standpoint, you know? I think that, again, look at some of the greatest companies on planet. So like, again, politics aside, it doesn't matter what you feel about him. Like Elon Musk is like the greatest entrepreneur that's alive today, maybe ever, right? And there are books on him. You know, my friend Eric Jorgensen wrote a fantastic book called The Book of Elon. Took all of his interviews, everything that's written about him, and put it in a manual that actually breaks down like, how did this guy build Tesla? How did he build SpaceX? How does he think about hiring people, right? And so like from that book, right, I took a principle from there of how he runs Tesla. I'll share it with you. So Elon has an algorithm that he runs with every single company. Every company runs through this algorithm. I run my company through this algorithm. We run our stuff, you know, whatever we do for clients through this algorithm. The algorithm is very simple. It's 5 steps: simplify, delete. And it's funny. I now have to think about it. It's simplify. No, I'm sorry. It's question, delete, simplify, automate, scale. Okay. So number 1. Question every requirement. So if you have a 10-step process, do you need 10 steps? Can you which one of these things is stupid and doesn't make sense? And you start deleting things. You want to delete things out of a process because it will streamline it. It'll make it better, right? You can scale that, for example, right? And the most important thing about deletion, okay, is that if you're not deleting enough things where you're putting stuff back, you're not deleting enough. You need to delete enough where you're like, okay, we actually did need that extra meeting, or we do need this thing, right? And simplifying is that after you question and delete things, you simplify things because simple things scale, right? And I'll tie that back into business principles in a second. And then after that's done, then you can think about automation. Okay, why is that important? Elon's biggest mistake that cost hundreds of millions of dollars is that when he was starting Tesla, they jumped straight away to automating. And the problem with automation is that you might automate a process or a thing that should not exist, right? And so then after that, after you do those 4 steps, then you can start thinking about like accelerating and scaling things. So just this thing about how the most successful entrepreneur on planet Earth runs multi-billion and now multi-trillion-dollar companies, a rep or anybody who's listening that can take that and apply it to anything they want in life. If you spend enough time thinking about these things and taking action on them, like you'll be surprised how many things happen. So like on that same note, right? Again, I'm not running an electric car company or a space company. I'm running an agency. So we look at some of our processes and I'm like, okay, when we onboard a client, right, and we go through our strategic phase, right, which takes a month, there's one part of it that had 3 meetings involved in it. And I said, do we need those 3 meetings? So we got rid of 2 of them. Okay, turns out we needed the 3. So we put them back. But like we know that now, right? And again, like the more you're able to think at a higher level, the easier it is you are to have impact. So as a small example, I started reading Jeffrey Moore's work from 10 years ago. Jeff Moore is the guy who wrote Crossing the Chasm, the technology adoption curve that you hear me talk about. Or if you speak to anybody who's higher up at any of these strategic companies, they all know this. They actually don't know it that well, but they know it at least, right? So one of the concepts, okay, and again, I'm going to share this because I think it's very relevant to a rep, but then you can extrapolate this up to a higher form of business. One of the concepts is when you go after an early market, we all know the concept of early adopters, right? But why early adopters? And why do you need, quote unquote, a beachhead? So let's say you have a device that can be used. So like in Mazor, okay? At Mazor, we had a robotic spine platform. It can be used in almost all segments of the spine, I think minus cervical, and there's like a neurosurgical application. We very quickly realized like our beachhead, like kind of like the World War II strategy of storming the beaches. Normally, the beachhead strategy is like we're doing like lower lumbar fusions. L4, L5, L3, like not the sexiest procedure, but it's high volume. Like we're gonna go after that. And the reason why you want to do that is that number 1, it's focus, and number 2, reference density, right? So when you pick a specific customer segment or like a procedure, and you're gonna go after that, like Intuitive build a multi-billion-dollar company saying, hey, this robot can be used for everything. We're looking at urology and specifically radical prostatectomy. So think about that. Radical prostatectomy was something that like less than 1% of surgeons in the world did. Why would they go after that, right? It seems counterintuitive. The reason why is because they're able to create reference density, okay? What that means is that if you do a really good job, and it takes time to get like a good job done where a customer is willing to give you a reference or testimony and everything, right? You don't want to have reference what it doesn't look like is you have, okay, a surgeon who has radical prostatectomy saying he loves a robot, and then a cardiac surgeon who loves a robot, and then like OBGYN, because that's not enough. You want to have like 5, 10, 15, 20, urologists who are like, we do radical prostatectomy, we love it. Because then you're able to go on to other segments. If you go back to first principle thinking or even physics, let's go back to a game everybody plays, bowling. What do you need to do to hit a strike? Think about when you're rolling a bowling ball. To hit a strike, you would think, oh, like I need to hit the side of the pins because if I do that, I'll hit like 2 or 3 pins at a time. That's not how you get a strike. You get a strike in bowling by hitting the very front pin, which is just 1 pin. By hitting that, correctly, you knock all the other pins out. So as a business or as a rep or however, or you're a small business owner, there's a point about applying physics and first principles to how you go after a market, right? And the reason why I say this is because it requires a hell of a lot of discipline. So like me as a business owner, you don't think that I would love to get a contract from like, a multi-billion-dollar company? Absolutely. The problem though is it splits the focus of our team. It doesn't give me reference density. So like, okay, I'm going to have a bunch of startups and then like this one strategic, maybe that'll help. Probably not, because sure, there might be some like schmuck CEO who's like, oh, you guys worked with Intuitive? Cool. Like us as a little startup, we would like that. most CEOs they're going to ask like, okay, like what kind of results have you gotten that are relevant to me? So like Intuitive is not raising money. Intuitive is not thinking about early adoption. Intuitive is in a completely different life cycle of their business, right? And so the reason why I went through all these things is to go back to the main point of like, you have to ask very specific questions and spend time thinking very deeply about these things, you know? And the only time that happens is that it can't happen in a vacuum. It happens from, let's say, going to, events at LSI, listening to your podcast, listening to my podcast, reading books. When you do that and when you have a high volume of information, then you can start connecting the dots. It's very interesting, the brain, how it works in terms of getting a variety of information and somehow synthesizing it subconsciously, you know? And so this all goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you're a rep and you're in your 20s and you're single, or even if you're married and you got no kids, you should be overloading yourself with responsibility. When I was a rep, okay, I made it a point to read almost a book a day, okay? I started with like a book a week, and then my close friend, he's like, dude, most of these books have a Pareto being like there's an 80-20, like 20% of the book is going to give you 80% of the year. Paretos exist in all facets of life, okay? And he's like, so you only need to figure out what 20% of the book you need to get. And so you need to be able to read a lot more efficiently and then move on to the next thing. And so there was a point where I actually even started a show just on Snapchat. This is like over 10 years ago, just to force myself to read that much, that in that level of volume, you know? Those are the kind of things that like reps need to start thinking about.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I hope listeners take away is what you're just saying is it's the thought process that goes so much deeper. Because again, a lot of the people that we have are very driven and they want to grow their career, but then they'll just go talk and say, oh, just do this for 2-3 years, and then you just go take this role. And then, we've had multiple guests who climb the ranks and they just get told, go be a manager because that's just what you do. It's just the process. But like you're saying, you have to start looking at this at a way earlier stage. And that's something you helped me with. Even when we started working together, I'm a rep and you had me start being like, hey, what about a business owner? Hey, what if you went to a startup? Hey, and you had me start looking at these different processes before I ever was actually considering them.
Yeah.
So I could actually have a better understanding, and then went to the startup world.
And again, psychologically, something happens when, like now that Elon's a trillionaire, there'll be another trillionaire, I guarantee you, within the next year or two. It's just like the 4-minute mile. It seemed like impossible. And then Roger Bannister broke it. And then like 12 people broke the 4-minute mile that same year because people were like, oh, it is actually possible, right? And so again, I think like as a rep or as a business owner, or as an aspiring entrepreneur, getting exposure to those kind of stories, right? So you never know, like, perception really is reality. And whatever you perceive yourself to be, you will be it. And so sometimes when you read these books, you listen to these podcasts, you need to hear that one thing that reframes how you see things, and then you just can't unsee it. For me, like as an example, I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I always knew it. I just didn't know how, and it was very scary. And when I decided to become an entrepreneur, was like not a good time. I did it 2021, so it's still COVID, and my wife's pregnant. And so I wasn't sitting on like stockpiles of cash either. And there are a couple people like who actually inspired me. Like one is a guy named Zuby. He's a good friend of mine. He's very, very, very famous guy on X. And Zuby is a rapper, but also a podcaster, political commentator and stuff. I remember looking at him like, man, this guy, he does not fit in a box. He does what resonates with him, and he's he's created his own business around himself. That was one person. Scott Adams, I do have to say, Scott Adams is another one, but Scott was already like very, very famous at the time. But the other person was Justin Welsh, and Justin's a super sharp guy. He built Patient Pop, I think, from 0 to 60 million in sales, and then decided to go the solopreneur ride. So when you hear the word solopreneur, like Justin Welsh is like, that's like his category. He created that entire category and all the people who are in that category, in my opinion. And Justin built a multi-million-dollar one-person business selling a course about LinkedIn, right? And I remember seeing that, and I'm like, man, that just inspires me. It didn't like most people when they look at things, they get like annoyed, like, oh man, I can't believe that person's doing this. I see these things and I just get inspired by it. You know?
That's a good point. I want people to hear that is a lot of times that's what we see, right? When someone else has success or they see an idea, a lot of times people will get mad, put them down, start talking trash compared to your point, my whole thing has always been like, wow, that's awesome. And then also, again, if there's a competitive side of you, well, if they did that, I wonder what I could do.
I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, man, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? You know, like that's the thing. People are like, oh, well, I'm like, oh man, you must be really smart. So if you're so smart, like, why aren't you rich? You know, that's the thing. People want to face that, right? This is true.
I love it. And for you, you work with a lot of startups. So I want to talk to the people that could be considering a startup or wanting to do that world. What's the biggest challenge you see with a lot of startups that are trying to come into the market?
Raising money.
And talk to me about that.
Yeah, so at a macro level, so essentially 2019, 2020, it was like peak ZERP. ZERP was zero, it was zero interest rate, zero interest rate. So like lending, borrowing money was like it was a smart idea. It's like 0%. And then on top of it, during 2021, just a boatload of money got shoved into startups all over the place. And then over the last few years, those valuations were like out of control. There's these companies getting valued at like huge multiples with no revenue and everything. And then like, those chickens came home to roost. And so as a result, all of venture actually underperformed. So like if you're an LP or limited partner and you got billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars and you put money into venture, you would have been better off putting in the S&P 500, and so when that happened, when these venture capitalists, who again, like people think they're really rich, venture capitalists go and raise money from really rich people, and they raise like a $50 million fund, $100 million fund. Those venture capitalists have a management fee that's usually 1 or 2%. So like, you're making a few $100,000, $1 million a year as a salary, plus you get carry, meaning like when a company exits, like you get a certain percent of that, right? So when they go out to raise money, right, they have to change their thesis. And so a lot of venture has to de-risk their investments. So that's why I said venture's playing private equity. What does private equity do? Private equity looks at companies that are making money. Private equity looks at a company and says, hey, this company's doing 10 million in EBITDA, 20 million in EBITDA, right?
Which means profit for everyone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do we make it 50 or 100, right? And so as a result of that, like it was very tough for MedTech, because MedTech is like it's like playing the game in hard mode, man. Like MedTech is pretty much like, hey, so like the average startup, makes about 8 pivots. You're not pivoting that much in MedTech. You get a device, you have an application, it's got to work, and once you get there, after you got to sell it, right? And so for a lot of MedTech, it was very, very difficult, right? But the things that changed is there's a few headwinds, right? Or tailwinds, rather. One is a lot of the strategics started spinning off their divisions, right? Which creates more of a healthy M&A, merger acquire environment. And so that was one side. So like as an example, like 3M, I think, spun out Solventum. And then probably the biggest one is J&J. They haven't done it yet. They're spinning out DePuy, right? And so you have these mini strategics. A mini strategic being like this is a term that I kind of coined, it like $1 to $15 billion market cap. So those companies, they're not going to grow coming up with their own products. They can't. The only way they're going to grow is through acquisition. And so if you have a marketplace where it used to be our Mag 7 of like, Abbott, Medtronic, Strike, and everything, and you add like 15, 20, 30 other like players within there that can acquire, right? It gets more competitive. Plus, I would say there's like a single major catalyst that if you remove this catalyst out of the mix, like I don't know if we'd be in the times we are today, but Boston Scientific saw this many years ago and said, okay, well, if Medtronic and J&J, if you guys aren't buying these companies, we're just going to buy them. So Boston Scientific has just been buying things like left and right, and that's activated the environment, right? Mm-hmm. So now let's fast forward to today. Yes, it's still tough to raise money, but the money is out there, right? More investors are starting to write checks. Strategics, the thing that you don't see in these reports is strategics are investing in a lot of companies, right? Big checks, right? But again, this goes back to why I have an agency that's focused on market engineering and helping these startups, is because part of this ability to raise capital is, if you're not a quote unquote spreadsheet company with revenue, you're a PowerPoint company, which means you have to have a very strong narrative. That narrative can't just resonate with a strategic and an investor. It has to resonate with the market. You have to have something tangible to show that if you put money in this thing, we are building a market. This is going to be a thing, right? And so I think that's the other thing. The other thing that we haven't seen quite yet, I'm going to predict that this will start happening, is right now a lot of investors are throwing a lot of money into AI companies, okay? And so the question is why are you hearing so much about data centers? The thing is that when a lot of investors start investing in AI companies, these valuations are huge. Perfect example, Lovable. Lovable is an AI company where you can essentially go and prompt it and it'll build a website or app for you, okay? So the valuation for that company was $6 or $7 billion. Well, a few months ago, Anthropic, who creates Claude, comes out and says hey, we have a new product that pretty much made Lovable a feature, right? And then Lovable's primary partner, I think, for compute was OpenAI, and OpenAI came up with it. So a lot of these AI companies are becoming features to these multi-billion-dollar giants. And so if you're an investor, it's man, if I invest in this company, what are the chances it's going to be worth nothing, right? And so now you'll see a lot of investors, one going into data centers, is building physical things. You're not going to, a competing data center is not going to spring up out of the ground the next day. But the other thing is also moving into things like space and defense. Okay, because again, those have better moats, and I think part of it is also MedTech, right? Because you come up with a MedTech company, whether it's a SaaS company or device or something there are going to be other competitors, but it's not going to be a flood to the market where in a month or two it used to be that a decade ago you had a solid in software solid 2 years to hit the market hard, and these days you got something that's hot, you got a few months, to be honest with you.
And here, that's the thing that people need to understand, and that's why I really like MedTech is, like you were saying, it's you have to be a good rep, you have to be really skillful. And again, like you said, it almost starts at the beginning where they can't pivot 8 times, right? And to the point that hopefully this encourages people instead of discourages people, it is a harder because there's more resistance to even get in here, right? If you have to go get approval just to even get your product in, and you have to get trials and all this stuff, there's way more resistance, but it's also where you can see if you go into the right category with exactly what you're talking about and you get it, sometimes you can get that head start. To that point, one of the guests that we had on, they're going into the urology space, but they have no competition, and they're literally one of the first. They're the first, and they raised over $50 million.
They're going to have competition really soon.
But it will come in soon.
Because nobody, that's the thing, is that if and this is another, again, another mistake I see MedTech founders and CEOs make is oh, we're the only ones. I'm okay, do you think that raising a bunch of money and then going to the market, you think that nobody's paying attention to that? I'll give you a great example. And by the way, just quick plug for the audience, we're putting a lot of really good content on our blog. So if you go to marketcraft.ai, go check out that blog. It's really, really good. But going back to this, there's this really interesting company called Contraline. They raised a $95 million Series A. So for context, most MedTech companies at a Series A level, they'll raise 10 or 20 mil, something like that. They raised 95. What are they doing? Contraline is a company that's dealing with male contraception. Okay? So they have this injectable gel that is essentially contraception for men, right? Okay, and this is a space that had, I think, 2 innovations in the last century, condoms and the vasectomy. Okay? And so that's a big innovation. I guarantee you in the next year, there's going to be another company that's going to raise money. And by the way, I have to give a shout out. I felt this way, but I got to give a shout out to LSI. LSI's they are a market intel company. Everybody knows them for the events, but they have this really great platform called Compass AI. It has deals and data and everything. We use that all the time. they have a prediction agent on there. The prediction agent also agreed and said that essentially was predicting that in the next 12 months there'll be a competitor to Contraline to come out that's going to raise like 25 mil, right? And that's the thing is that, like, you know, if you're going after building a new market, there's money to be made. People are going to go after that. There's no shame when it comes to that.
No, but this is where it gets important. What you're saying though is like you get the 12-month head start, but what are you going to do with it, right? And then also with the training and when we're looking at sales reps, and again, and this is the thing, because there's so many people, especially in sales, that think they're just going to get it all, right? You're going to get more competition. You're going to get the pieces of it.
And I mean, this goes back to why it's very important to think about the narrative, right? Because like the thing is that, like, okay, I'll use this watch. Okay, so I bought this watch. It's a Victorinox. It's a Swiss watch. Bought it for like I think $700 or $800 like 10 years ago. Turns out this watch is not made anymore. So this watch is worth like thousands of dollars. Okay, now like there's an illusion that exists. Okay, and the illusion is the thing, right? It's never about the object, right? So this watch used to be $700, now worth, you know, a few thousand. The Rolex Pepsi, the Pepsi Rolex, okay, used to be able to buy that thing for like $6 or $7 grand. Okay, today it's 30 grand. Okay, an illusion has been created. Okay, and that's not just like the watch market, that's every single market. Okay, it's never about the actual object, it's about the narrative around the object. And the more people that believe in that narrative, the brand who controls that narrative controls the price, controls everything, right? And at that point, right, you dictate what's going to happen, right? And so, again, like look at electric cars. Tesla wasn't the first electric car company, right? It was Toyota with the Prius, and there was a few other ones. But Tesla's the one who went after the narrative and the category, et cetera. And some schmuck's going to be like, oh, but Tesla doesn't market. What are you talking about? They have the most viral, marketable CEO founder that has ever existed, and he bought like the biggest megaphone on planet Earth, which is X, formerly known as Twitter. Like, you know, those things they don't happen by accident, you know?
Yeah. And that's, I think, just hopefully the guests are seeing like, oh, I need to open my eyes to different things because this category is so different. And it's not like if you looked at others.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that, again, like if you spend time studying, thinking, taking action, like in that order, study, think, take action, study, think, take action. Too many people, I tell them like, if the result of your reading is knowledge, like you're just a fool. But if it's action, like that's actually how you become wealthy. It's how you become successful, right? And so you can take these principles, and some reps like, well, you know, I don't run a company. You can go take these principles and apply to yourself because you're technically a product, right? You know, somebody wants to hire you, like that's you're technically a product that's trying to sell and market itself, right? And so there's no excuse not to be able to take these principles and apply it, right? And again, like going back to even market craft, right? So part of our process is like some of it's like not wildly sophisticated. Part of it is after we set strategy and everything, like we have to create some content, you know, on an ongoing basis. Okay. So how do we think about content in terms of like, what's the message that's getting pushed across? What's the narrative, right? How's this being perceived, right? It all goes back to that. And so when you boil these things that seem like seemingly simple down to first principles, right? That's when you can start figuring out like these are the points of leverage that I have and how I need to think about things.
Yeah. And when you see in medical device sales right now in MedTech, right, you've worked with a lot of different companies, and then you see reps and you talk to still a decent amount, just having conversations and from what you've done in the past. What do you think separates the companies that can get those reps or the reps that go to like a startup compared to if they go to a big strategic like Medtronic or Intuitive?
The difference between those two things, I mean, it depends on personality, to be honest with you. Like some people their personality works well in a large organization. There's structure, there's hierarchy, there's bureaucracy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just part of the game, right? The other side is in the startup. Like, startup is not a place for people to get along. You know, it's an environment that's like, it's a lot of intensity. There's a lot of lack of process, those kind of things, right? And so you got to figure out like where you fit. You know, there are some really brilliant executives that I know at like Intuitive, J&J and everything, they would be really, really lousy startup leaders. And I know people in the startup world where if you took them, VPs and chief commercial officers, I know if you take them and put them to run a division of like Stryker, and they would mess it up, right? And so I think, but the benefit is that when you're younger, you have the ability to try these things out, and again, like nothing's preventing you from getting exposure, even like you do a lot of like meetups and everything for people to use LinkedIn and try and like get on a call with somebody to learn more, like I think those are the things. I think the more you start to understand yourself, the better. And this goes back to even my journey, which was my last job. I was the head of growth for a company that I invested in. It was my best friend's company, and it didn't work out. And I ended up having to leave. And I kind of realized, I'm like, man, if this didn't really work out the way I wanted to, and I'm working, and it's a company I invested in, and it's my best friend's company, I'm like, the chances of me finding the right company that I'm going to have this like long and amazing career at that I kept thinking would be a thing, I was like, it's pretty low. I was like, and that's when I was like, I think I should probably start a company, and again, like, nothing is, it's very rare that these things are life or death. People treat these decisions like, oh man, if I make this one career move and then like I'm gonna lose you, nobody cares.
You won't, because you can get fired tomorrow and it all goes away.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So people overput that. But one thing I wanted to touch on is going back to just the people and the people who come on your show and all that. Mm-hmm. You're really great at building relationships. But can we talk about how important it is about relationships just in this industry? Because again, you see it every single day. You work with a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And again, whether you're a rep, whether you're an investor, whether you're someone who's trying to raise money, like, can you just talk to that about the relationship or building relationships?
When it comes to building relationships, I think the most important thing to think about is, what can I give this person? It sounds like that's kind of like the obvious thing, but let me show you the non-obvious point, which is, let's say, as an example, okay, we have a mutual friend now, Ray Cohen, as I like to call him, Uncle Ray, right? So Ray needs nothing from me. Right? He's got all the connections he wants. He's made good money in his career. Doesn't need anything from me. The best thing that I can do is be a good friend to Ray, which means that when I reach out to him and I ask him for advice, I follow that advice, right? And then I listen to him, right? And then when we spend time together, I can be somewhat educational and informative. I can be also entertaining, right? And I think those are the ways that you develop relationships, right? You have to think about like how that is. And I think also putting yourself out there a little bit. And I'll give you a great example of this, right? So, Ray we got introduced through Scott Pentel, and Ray came on my show. And I like to think that we kind of were the first to really put him out there, and he really enjoyed that. And he's since then has done, which I have to give him credit compared to the rest of our industry. He goes on, podcasts and panels, and he spends time with the people, right? And not behind like a curtain or something, because he's spending time sharing his knowledge, his input, his insights, and everything. And I wish this is something that more of the industry would do, and I'm trying to get more people to do that. But anyways, back to Ray, so we did that. I spent time to really prepare for that. He had a good time. When he had LSI USA a couple years ago, he asked me to be the one who interviewed him, right? So that was it, right? Okay. And since then, I've asked him for like a couple favors, right, that are mutually beneficial, like for him to come on a keynote with me at MD&M, like so stuff like that, right? But then one day I was at MedTech Innovator, another great organization. What they do is it's an accelerator for companies. They go and pitch and they get feedback. It's phenomenal. So I was coming back from them, and I sent him a text. I'm like, hey, Ray, like I'm actually coming down from LA. Can I come and visit you? Can I come see you? And he's like, yeah. And he texted me. I'll never forget this. He's like, and again, Ray's a very seasoned like executive that like shoots straight, right? And he's from New York, like really shoots straight. He's like, yeah, what are we discussing? And I remember like seeing that message. I'm like, what are we discussing? And I was like, and so I sent him a text and I said, Ray, I don't have anything to really talk to you about. But I don't want, to have like an ask every time I want to see you. I generally just want to see you and like spend some time with you. And he's like, yeah, sure. So we actually went to dinner. Believe it or not, it was actually my birthday. And so when I sat down at dinner with him, we had a great time. We spent like 2.5 hours together. But like towards the end of dinner, like, again, what I love about it is that I'll ask him questions and he'll tell me like really fantastic stories and everything. And so I told him, I said, Ray, I didn't want to tell you on the text, but I was like, tonight's actually my birthday. It was Thursday. We already celebrated my birthday with my family. So anybody's like, oh, why didn't you celebrate with your family? I celebrated with my family. It's done. And I'm a grown man. Like, I don't care about doing a big like celebration, whatever. It's not.
You're not having birthday week?
Nah, dude. Like, no. So I told him, I was like, hey, Ray, I was like, tonight is actually my 40th birthday. And I already celebrated with my family. And that's why I really wanted to have dinner with you. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, well, I'm honored. Thank you. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, well, Ray, I wanted to ask you, when you turned 40, what was going on in your life and what advice do you have for me? And I just shut up. And he's like, man, I got to think about that. And of course he went on and told me some phenomenal stories, like really, really valuable advice and advice that's going to like be very important to me in my business and life. And so again, going back to the maintenance of relationships, you have to put time into these things, right? So as an example, with him and I'm gonna use, I think the managers and directors and people who are like a level above you, but like the people who are like way above you in terms of their, like, you want to call it, I don't see anybody way above me, but in terms of their age and experience and everything, right? Like I can't, there's people at race seniority that I can't just call on like a Saturday night, like, hey dude, what are you doing? You want to get together? Like, can't do that. Yeah. But you have to find times to maintain these relationships. So like, as an example, if I see something that is relevant to that person, right? I'll send him a text, I'll send him an email like, hey, I saw this article, I was thinking about you, just want to let you know. I got in the habit of handwriting notes. So I have really nice stationery at home. I have a wax kit. I have my own wax stamp. I'll try and think like, who have I not? And I need to make a spreadsheet to do this, by the way, to get in better habit of keeping up. And so I'll write like a card to somebody. Sometimes like we spend too much time from the screen, so I'll take a break. Like, okay, and I have all these envelopes that have a postage on it. I have my address stamped on it. So all I got to do is fill out the address, write the card. And it doesn't have to be this like long card. I'm like, hey, I was thinking about you, really enjoyed this, blah, blah, blah. And I send it. I send multiple of those throughout the week. I think I may have sent you one even. Yeah. So stuff like that. Another great example. I'll give you a great example. So, and again, like, I don't know if I have advice. I have a lot of great ideas and examples. Chris Dewey, who people should listen to that episode I did with him. So Dewey spelled Dewey. Chris was the founding board member of Mako Surgical, which got acquired by Stryker. It's like their like bread and butter, like, robot, right? So Chris and I developed this relationship a couple years ago. I went and played golf with him, etc. And I had photos of us in my phone. And this used to be when I used to go to Miami Recorder, but I hadn't gone in a while. We had another baby and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, almost 2 years has gone by and I've not called him. And I was like really embarrassed. I sent him a letter actually half a year ago, but apparently he didn't see it. And so I was like, and again, this gentleman's much, much older than me, and much busier, I think. He's, an investor and everything. So I said, I'm just going to FaceTime him. So I'll FaceTime him. So that's the other thing, like doing things that people are not expecting you, handwritten note, phone call, FaceTime. So I FaceTime him, he answers, and he was so happy to see me. I'm like, Chris, I'm so, and this is the other thing. There's an art to dealing with people. There's a part of acting, right? Because again, I always think about when somebody spends time with me, it's an experience, right? So do I have some stories? Do I have some jokes? Do I have questions to ask them so that their time with me, like they may not remember anything I said, but they're gonna be like, man, I had a really good like time with Omar Khateeb. So he answers and he's like, hey buddy, he's like, so good to see you. Like, what a nice surprise. I'm like, Chris, I wanted to FaceTime. I owe you a very sincere apology. I got very serious. And he's like, oh, okay. And he was like preparing, like, I was like, Chris, I was with my wife last night and I was looking at my phone, and I got a memory that popped up and it was a photo of us playing golf. And my wife said, yeah, didn't you used to hang out with him a lot? What happened? I was like, oh, I haven't been to Miami in a while. She's like, when was the last time you talked to him? I was like, it's been like a year and a half. And I was like, Chris, I'm so embarrassed that like I consider you a good friend and I didn't even call you. And he's like, oh, no, you don't. That's totally okay. And that's when I was like, by the way, I sent you a card. Did you get my card? And he's like, no, so I think finding ways to, I think using an Excel spreadsheet is helpful. Like Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, does that. You have to find ways to maintain these things, right? And it you just have to put effort into it, right? And again, this is the big thing, which is like there are people who mentor me, who I'm friends with and everything. I know for a fact, I don't know what it could be. At some point, I might need something. I might need some help. I don't want them, the first call that they're getting from me after a couple years is like, hey, I need your help, right? Like there's some great friends out there, but in general, like I feel like it's very dishonorable, And so like, that's why like I try and I have, even if you're single, you can do this. Go on Shutterfly, create a Christmas card list. Every year, take some photos of yourself, put it in a collage. On the back of it, you can type out what happened to you that year. Have that send out to everything. At least people are like, oh, like this is what's going on with that person, right? Yeah. So those are the kind of things that you have to do. And then also, I think it's very important to do this with people who are junior to you. Okay, so great example. Okay, Henry Peck, who's not junior to me right now, by the way. Henry Peck, 10 years ago, I think, came into my DMs on LinkedIn because he was coming out of college looking for advice and mentorship. I immediately recognized, same with you, that this guy is super talented, super sharp. He's going to be a somebody in the industry, right? And I genuinely liked him, right? And so I went out of my way to try and, help and provide some mentorship and everything. And lo and behold, this guy's the number 2 guy at LSI, and he's like interfacing with the most important people in MedTech and everything. And so anytime something comes up that can be helpful to me, he picks up the phone and calls me. But we also have like a very close relationship, right? So again, like I think I have an inner circle. It's a very small inner circle, right? But outside of that, there are people that I try and maintain relationships with and everything. And you can't do that with everybody. And so this is why I like going to like in-person events. You go see somebody, you try and remember a few things. Like they have kids, maybe they got a dog that was sick, they changed jobs, something like that, right? And I think when you get in the habit of doing that, like that's something that's my superpower. I'm in the habit of doing that kind of thing. And I think maybe my cheat code is also the podcast, because then I'm able to catch up with people. And then if people haven't talked to me in a couple of years, they feel like they're always hearing from me because they're listening to the show or something.
Yeah, no, and the podcast can go a long way with that.
Yeah.
But no, I really appreciate it because like I said, when I went to LSI, you were the dude. And I just mean that, like, again, just when I tell people, like, literally everyone was talking about Omar, and I truly mean that. And, like, when I would mention Omar, like, just the brand you've created for yourself. And so, really, my whole goal for everyone is just to see, you can come into medical device sales and do a lot of different things. And you just have to understand, you don't have to just be a rep. You can go and look at other ways. But if you look at Omar, like, look at how much studying he does, how many relationships that he builds. Like, look at how he looks at the world. That's what I really appreciate about you is just you take me to a deeper level than I would normally look at certain things.
I like to go deep, man.
And you challenge, and I think that's what you need in your life. And so that's what I really appreciate. And then again, seeing what you're doing in the industry now and working with these startups, which again, most people will never understand what that actually means, and the challenges that come up with startup world. And so what you're able to bring is absolutely amazing. But before we end, the question I wanted to ask is, what's something that you really want the audience to know?
That's a really good question. What is something that I want the audience to know? I'll share it from the point of view of like a founder, because I think that this advice, I'll share a couple of pearls of wisdom. So one is, so I always like to go back to this concept of focus and where you put your attention to, and that perception really is reality, right? And so, for one, you should never believe anything that does not give you power. And I've gotten to a point in my life where I just don't believe in things that don't give me power, right? And so, that sounds crazy, but then when you look at sports and in entrepreneurship and everything, again, we talked about Elon, to go back to that. How many times did people say like, oh, you can't do car manufacturing that way. You can't do this that way. You can't do that. The guy never believed in anything that did not give him power, right? And again, what helps is it's not just having this like, lofty like hope of like, oh no, it's gonna work. Like he boiled down to first principles. So as an example, like when it came to like producing rockets, right? First principles, like, okay, you can't do this because like you can't, it's too expensive to do this with rockets. Like, okay, what does a rocket cost? Okay, what are the raw materials for a rocket? If we took the raw materials and laid them on the ground and waved a magic wand, how much does that cost? And they found out, they're like, well, to actually produce a rocket with raw materials and you just wave a magic wand, it's like 5%, less than 5% of the cost of today's rocket. So it's like, if it's less than 5% of the cost, there's a lot of inefficiencies for how rockets are produced, right? So again, using first principle thinking helps, okay? So don't believe in things that don't give you power, number one. Number two, again, going to not only perception is reality, is that you just have to do more. You can't, people underestimate how much they have to do. And then more importantly, that like they could be right. There's this meme, this famous meme, it's an internet meme where it shows a guy with a pickaxe walking away, and if he had hit one more time, like he would have hit like all these diamonds, right? You never want to be that meme. And so on one side, if you take that analogy and think about it with golf, if you're playing golf, right, a bad shot could be that, like, you know what, you're hitting just a few millimeters behind the ball and the face of the club is a few millimeters too open, everything. So if you just make these like 1 millimeter adjustment here, 1 millimeter adjustment here, all of a sudden, instead of you shanking the ball to the right into the pond, you're hitting it onto the green. Like sometimes in business and life, you're literally a few millimeters adjustment away from like a breakthrough success, right? And then the last thing I would say is that, and I'm saying this like, this is like self-talk therapy for me, which is I have to remind myself this, is that sometimes, when you're tired, okay, and things aren't going the way you want exactly. And I went through this like 6 months ago, and things are really going the way that I want right now. And the reason why you're tired is because you just haven't won enough yet. When you start winning, you have unlimited amount of energy. You are super passionate about what you want to do. And so to get to that point, you have to be willing to lose and not care at all. Like, most people, like usually with entrepreneurs, it's and that doesn't mean go try new things all the time. There's shiny objects. Again, there's going back to, there's discipline and focus that's involved. But like, try this, it fails. Try that, it fails. Okay, I'm going to do this. Didn't work. That's fine. It was meant to fail. I'm still going to win. Finding a way to have that mentality where like people think you're nuts. You're like, man, why is this person still doing this? Why have they not, why are they still good? Why didn't they give up when I thought they were going to give up? Why didn't they give up when I would have given up, right? And so again, like take that to the most wild like stories in business in planet Earth, like Tesla, SpaceX, Apple was like this, right? They all have the same story, which is like they were royal failures for a long time, right? And then they started to win, and now they just keep on winning, right? So I think if you take these lessons of business, and you can even see this in history, right? How do you distill it down to you, the individual, and take action on it? So for me, if you really want to learn a lot about business, yeah, you can study like business stories of Apple and everything. Study the lessons of history. Like, sure, like, you can look at GE and they're like, how they went on like an acquisition spree, M&A spree through the 80s and everything. Or you can look at Alexander the Great, who conquered half the world, right? And so, you learn a lot from history about what's worked in the past. Like there's a reason why you want to have like alliances. So like, again, I'll kind of open the curtain back here a little bit. Like there's a reason why I'm very public. I don't have a lot of like, public relations, but I have a very public partnership with like LSI, right? I'm developing a very nice and great partnership and alliance with OC Octane, right? It's very different from LSI. I'm developing a great relationship with MedTech innovator and Paul Grand, right? I'm developing these alliances where each of these entities are getting some serious value from me, I'm getting some value from them. It's not in competition with anything. And so you have to think of it like that. So I think, again, if you summarize a lot of what we're saying, like when you spend time reading books, watching shows, movies, and you go deep on like the concepts, like even something as simple as like watching like The Sopranos, like what made Tony Soprano fail at the end, right? Like at the end, he just could not control himself, right? And at the end, he died with like no alliances, no friends, no nothing, right? So like going into movies like that and content and thinking about it and saying like, okay, what's the lesson here? If God put this in front of me to get a lesson, what's the lesson I'm going to take from this? And how am I going to apply it to my life? How am I going to take action on it, right? When you start living like that, right? Nothing's out of reach for you, right? And I try and take the same approach to how I run my family, right? So, do you mind if I do on a tangent on
Go
this?
for it.
Okay, so perfect example, okay, is like, okay, I'm spending all this time and energy to learn how to be a great CEO and a founder, and how do I build a company and everything. Family's the same thing. So I'm like, oh, I had this disagreement with my wife. Well, that's because we never had the agreement of like how something needs to be done in the house, right? Or with our kids, right? And then like I'm now I'm raising kids. I'm like, okay, simple scales, right? So like with my son, he's now 4, right? So I'm developing our own code of honor in the house. So like honor is a big thing. I'm very big on honor culture, but like I need to codify that. Okay, so right now as a little boy, what do I tell him? I always tell him like, hey, are you gonna be a good boy today, or are you gonna be a great boy? He's like, I'm gonna be a great boy, and he gets in trouble and stuff. He's a typical boy, right? But I have to explain him what does it mean to be a great boy. I boiled it down to like 4 very simple things you can remember. It's like you work hard, you love your family, you show respect, and you're disciplined. Okay, now I have to break that stuff down to him. Like, what does discipline mean? Like, I have to think about it in a very simple way. Discipline means you do what you have to do, even when you don't want to, right? And I have to repeat that over and over and over again to him, right? Same way, reason why, like, why do you pray in religion? Because they're trying to get you to do these incantations over and over and over again, so it's like ingrained as an operating system in your brain. So again, I try and learn these things, first principles thinking, and apply it across my entire life. So like I always tell people, like who I am at home with my family, it's practically with maybe a degree of separation, the same person in business, same person in this case, and everything else, right? And I think the most important thing is that when you do that, again, simple scales, I can't be a different person in my business and at home, because I can't scale that. That's how people end up being miserable in life. They have lousy characters. Like, you meet these people. They're very miserable people to be around, right? And again, it boils down to like very simple things, showing respect, being good on your word, right? Being genuinely interested in people, right? Little things like that, right? Going back to to the team I have at Market Graph, like I pay people really well. Everyone in my company is not a W-2, but they work full time. They're on contract. They can do other things, right? But I have to work extra hard to make sure that they get paid well. But are they gaining a lot of benefit from working? Are they proud to work here? Do you feel like they're growing all these different things? So I have to think about these things, right? I can't just take it for granted. Just same thing like in a marriage. My wife is married to me till death do us part. But that doesn't mean that I get to sit back, get fat, not find ways to improve myself, not find ways to be a good husband, right?
Be available for her.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and most people they don't like hearing this, but like, man, you know what? Like, life is not easy. It's all supposed to be hard. It doesn't get any easier, but you get to decide like how you perceive that hard. You see what I mean? And if you have meaning to it, if you, again, one more book plug here is like if you read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who talks about like surviving a Holocaust camp. If you can find meaning in life, surviving through the hardships of a Holocaust camp, like, we live in the modern world. We all live in America. We won. We won.
Yep.
We won the lottery. That's my take. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
No, I really appreciate it, man. And again, I just want you to know I just continue to learn from you all the time. And what I want people to really know is, again, I wouldn't be where I'm at today without you. And it's been because of that first phone call that you say you remember. And that, you just continue to push me. And again, even having me go events, all the conversations, just all of the conversations that we have. And it's what I want to just push to people is your mentors matter.
I appreciate that, but I will say, like, dude, this is your world. I'm just living it. You're here because of Jacob McLaughlin. I was just along for the ride, man. That's it.
I appreciate it. Well, where can people find more of Omar?
Yeah. Okay, so you can find me on any platform. So if people follow me, I would recommend, you're all gonna follow me on LinkedIn. That's the obvious one. Go find me on X, because you're gonna find a lot of really interesting content on there for me. And find me on Instagram. Instagram, like, you know, my content goes out on there pretty often, but I'd say, like, definitely follow me on X. For video purposes, like, definitely look up the State of MedTech. We have a great YouTube channel. And then I would say, for those who really want to get to another level, like, go to marketcraft.ai, go look at the blog. We've done some, like, our team's done some phenomenal, like, breakdowns of like intuitives, you know, business, axonics, category development, market engineering. Like, go read that blog. We're putting out a lot of content on there. So that's where I tell people to start.
If you're someone who's hungry and wants to keep growing, I highly recommend you go check out. And I just want you to know, Omar, thank you so much, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
Appreciate you.